Good evening, everyone. Tonight is February 22nd, 2013. I'm Matthew Ogden, and I'd like to welcome you to our weekly Friday evening national live internet broadcast with Mr. Lyndon Larouche. Tonight, we are joined by Jason Ross and Leander Bernstein in the studio. We will be following our usual format, and so I would like to present to you Mr. Lyndon Larouche.
You know that there's a lot of stealing going on in this nation of ours, and it's based on the money. They're passing out money, and using money, but there's no value to it. The problem here is that the monetary system, which is typified by the increase of high inflation rates, quantitative easing, so-called, is a complete fraud. There is no value whatsoever. If we were to wipe out all obligations on the basis of this quantitative easing system, it would be nothing but a benefit to the United Nations and its people. There is no value in quantitative easing. It's a complete swindle. It's a fraud. If we simply cancel it, we wouldn't be canceling anything that deserved to exist. And that we've got to learn. Therefore, we are at a point now that if the attempt is made to continue quantitative easing, you're going to have effects on the U.S. population which will lead toward rapid increase of mass death rates. Because the rate of hyperinflation in itself, largely the hyperinflation based on this bailout system, is itself a killer of mankind. If we were to cancel all payments on account of quantitative easing, nobody who deserves anything would lose anything. In fact, they would gain a great deal. So that's the problem we face right now. We have to realize that the entire swindle, the monetary system as it functions now, is nothing but one big swindle. There's no truth to it. It's a fraud. And those officials of government who are engaged in this, such as our quantitative easing people, they're committing a fraud, which in any decent society would be considered a crime. And they would be subject to criminal charges, as these people should be. That is the crucial point here we have to deal with. We must exactly cancel the obligations to quantitative easing and recognize that the whole system is a fraud. Now, that would mean, of course, really shutting down Wall Street. But so what? What's Wall Street ever done for the United States? And particularly the recent crew. It's worthless. And what we're going to have to do, if we're going to save this nation, we're going to have to get rid of quantitative easing. We have to recognize that it's nothing but a complete fraud. There is no real value, economic value in this thing. It's a drawdown against anything that is economic value. And it actually is, look at the way prices have gone up. Look at what it used to cost to buy things as opposed to now. We have been in a hyperinflationary destructive force. What is the cost of any article? Go back to 10 years ago. Take any article, common article of purchase. Compare the prices of that article then with the price now. Look at just the prices of ordinary commodities. Shoes, shirts. You know, $150 for a shirt? I mean, what kind of clowns are we that we don't know that this is a swindle? They tell you it's a big bargain if you get it for $60. Another little booby. A shirt over $10, that's about as high as you should go. And if you look through other commodities, look at foodstuffs. Look at the cost of food. You go into a restaurant, you think you've been mugged. And all these values really represent nothing. We could and should tomorrow morning cancel most of these payments on moral grounds. So that the idea that we have a problem of management, we have a problem of managing the president, who needs a lot of management on him, not by him, and we have all these Wall Street crowd, these critters from Wall Street, they don't need any money. They've got too much money, and they never were worth anything anyway. So that if we were to cancel, just simply cancel obligations on these accounts, which are swindles, it wouldn't hurt the nation one bit. As a matter of fact, it would be a great good. The idea that value, that something has intrinsic value because you have a price tag on it, is a piece of idiocy. This whole Wall Street operation is not worth a damn to the U.S. population. It has no worth whatsoever. Why are we paying it? Well, I know why. But the point is, we come to the point that if we don't do this, if we don't cancel this system, the bailout system, quantitative easing system, just wipe it out now. Just stop it. It didn't earn anything. It has no legitimate claim against the American people. Why are we paying them off? They're not doing anything for the United States. They're ruining it. And we have to realize that that's where we are. And if we don't very soon take positive action to terminate what we call the Wall Street system, if we don't do that, there's not going to be a United States. We're at a breaking point right now. And we have to realize that there is no value in these amounts, these accounts. None whatsoever. Simply replace them, eliminate them. Put in a Glass-Steagall system. Now, what's the issue here in the Glass-Steagall system? In terms of money. The money market does not represent, in general, any actual value. The idea that there's a price tag on Wall Street money, Wall Street games, doesn't mean anything. It's not worth anything. If we just said, we're not going to pay it anymore, because they don't do anything for the American nation. They don't do anything for the United States and its people. They don't do anything except steal. They don't earn anything. They don't perform a duty, a service for anything. If we shut them down tomorrow, just said, shut you down, we're tired of you. You've been sucking our blood too long. We're tired of that. We can't have no more blood to give you. Then we would turn around and we would say, well, what do we want to do? Well, first of all, we have a lot of useless people. Very poor people who are useless people. They don't even have the skills anymore to produce anything. They don't have the inclination for actual work that's productive. We're seeing a complete moral breakdown of most of the population on this account. They have no reason to continue existing. Why should they continue to exist? They don't produce anything. They just drag on things. They become criminal elements running around the society. They have no reason to exist. They have no sense of an identity, no sense of having an identity in society, the sense, well, I can be proud that I am doing this. I can be happy that I have this job to do, or this kind of work to do, or this kind of activity to do. We've destroyed the motivation which characterizes a safe nation. And we have to understand the fact that we have to take quick and arbitrary action, which is generally Glass-Steagall. That's all you have to really do to do it. If you enact Glass-Steagall tomorrow morning and put it to effect, you're going to shut down most of Wall Street right away. So what? Well, now we're not producing anything to speak of. And instead of producing things, we're now spending money to contribute to these parasites. So we don't have to worry about the fact that we have an alleged obligation to these clowns. We in the United States have no obligation to these clowns. And they're mostly foreigners anyway. They're mostly British, of the British Empire. What do we owe them? We don't owe them anything. So all we have to do is say, look, that's not, you're not producing anything. Why are you getting paid? What, are you poor? You just need the money because you need a bailout, a little bailout, just to get your cookies for tonight, before you go to bed, cookies and milk or something. Now, we have to get wise, and the American people got to get wise. There is no honest obligation of the United States and its population to continue to pay off Wall Street and what it represents. None. We don't need President Obama, for example. He costs us too much. He's not worth the money he's getting. So therefore we have to realize this. We have to immediately take drastic action as the United States in order to restore our system of productivity, to essentially shut down the Wall Street system. Go to a Glass-Steagall reform immediately. Now then we will have a shortage of means of production needed to get the nation back on a operating basis. We're going to have to push on that. We're going to have to start bringing in real employment, productive employment, because we have a shortage of everything. Now, we have another problem here, the green problem. There is no honest basis for continuing to support the so-called green policy. The green policy is a pure fraud, a pure swindle against the people of the United States and other nations. Because you are destroying the ability to produce of the nation. And the history of mankind, just look even at all the animal species as well as the human species. What's the history of all animal life? If it does not increase its productivity, it dies out. If you go to green, what are you doing? You're taking food now, foodstuffs, for a hungry nation, taking the foodstuff again out of their hands in order to make them into kerosene or something of that sort. In other words, to destroy the ability of the human population of the United States to continue to live. And they're being cut by the Greenie movement. The Green movement is actually a crime against humanity. Because if you take the history of living species, how do species live? Well, the ones that are not so productive die out. The ones that evolve into a more productive form of species tend to prosper. What happens then if you take a human being and get them to stop being productive and tell them to be useless and to use technologies which are inferior, so that actually the ability of the people of the United States to live is being destroyed? Take the Western Plains area from the Mississippi westward. What's our food supply? It's been destroyed. What are we going to have for food? Well, if they didn't take it away to make gasoline out of it, which is often the case, you're going to find the whole area toward the west of the Mississippi is going to collapse. And the food supply of the nation is going to collapse. And mass death rates are going to spread throughout the United States if this keeps going. So the time has come for a simple thing to recognize what value means in an economy. Value in an economy means that human beings are producing, directly or indirectly, are producing a greater value of use values as such for mankind. And that is the standard by which an economy has to be measured. If the economy is not progressing with more advanced technologies, compensating for depletion of certain resources by accelerating the productivity, if we're not increasing the skill levels, raising the skill levels of the population, we're going to destroy ourselves. And we've reached the point now that a major destruction of the food supply of the nation is already on the books for this spring. For this spring. And that means mass death inside the United States, among other places. So the issue now is that we have to go to Glass-Steagall system immediately, with no exceptions. Now you've got to get all these Wall Street leeches are going to start screaming. I don't like a screaming lynch. That's a terrible thing. But we're going to have to do that immediately, make that change immediately. We're going to have to, in Glass-Steagall, we're going to have to get a national credit system supplemented to get people back working in productive capacities again. If we don't, this nation is finished. And if this nation is finished, most of the world is pretty much finished. So the time has come where the idea that we have an obligation to meet these, either the greenie policy, which we have no obligation to meet whatsoever. It's an immoral policy, and there's no moral obligation to that. But without increasing the productive powers of labor, instead of the green policy, we are not going to be able to sustain this nation's present population. And that's where we are. We're at that point. We're at the point where we're going to have to take effective action to shut down both the green policy and the looting policy of Wall Street. Those two things must be shut down. Otherwise, it will not be possible to maintain the population of this nation alone. That's where we stand. Do we wish to survive? Knowing that with the green policy continues and the current Wall Street policy continues, we shall not survive, or at least most of us will disappear rather quickly. So the moral question is, do we wish the United States to survive and its people to survive? Or do we wish to continue the policy of supporting Wall Street and easing policy? Yeah?
Thank you. You're watching a live webcast with Mr. Lyndon Larouche. Now, I would like to ask Leandra to come to the podium to pose a question which has come in from some institutional contacts inside Washington, which is directly on the subject that you began with.
Thank you, Matt. As Matt said, this is a question that comes in from government institutional figure on quantitative easing, but I do think it's notable just to set the question up a little bit more than even what you've done in your opening remarks. But this is not coming out of the G20 meeting last week. It's clear that the quantitative easing is not simply a U.S. policy, that this is being done in Venezuela. They're calling it competitive devaluation of currency, being done in Venezuela, being done by Japan, being done in the European Union by the ECB. And you've had notable responses just this week to this rampant QE policy. Among them, a conservative Swiss paper published the remarks of a Hong Kong investment research firm saying that Southern Europe is in a death spiral because the industrial basis has been destroyed since the introduction of the euro. Again, this is published in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, very conservative paper. They go on to shall we say, drop the H-bomb. They mention by name that hyperinflation will be the consequence of continuing the ECB policy, the easing policy. Moreover, again, coming out of the G20 meeting, the China Daily reported that if nations continue with the easing, with the monetary easing, it would lead to, quote, runaway inflation or hyperinflation, and they say nobody will win with these currency wars. Now those are some of the shocks that have been given and received on an international scale. In the United States, the minutes from the Federal Open Market Committee of January 29th were just released midweek. And what was revealed in those minutes is not just that some members of the Open Market Committee were opposed to Ben Bernanke's quantitative easing, but now many of those FOMC members are opposed. And there's a great concern that the longer the policy goes on, I mean, it's the QE4 policy of buying $85 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities and treasury securities will add up to, I think it's over $2 trillion by the end of the year. But the concern that if this keeps going on, it will be impossible to back out, to exit the quantitative easing policy. So the response will either be to either print money faster or raise interest rates, things, the levers that the Federal Reserve has available to them. But the question then comes in. You have this opposition now coming out of the Federal Open Market Committee. What should these members who are opposed to the Bernanke policy do? You have strong indications that they will demand a halt to Bernanke's printing press operations, but clearly that alone is insufficient. What other measures can be taken by the Fed to address the underlying economic collapse, as was presented by you in your diagram of the triple curve?
Well, there's only one measure that can work. A very simple measure. Shut it down. How do you shut it down? Glass-Steagall. What do you need beside Glass-Steagall? Well, you need a program of investment, productive investment, to replace this nonsense. But the essential thing is we have to actually build up an increase of investment in production, which means we have to create a monetary addition, which is the type that was done under the first President of the United States and his Treasury Secretary. All we have to do is go back to the first term of President George Washington and his Treasury Secretary and go to work right away, and suddenly you will find mysteriously all these hyperinflationary things will just vanish, pop, go away. Because what will happen if you Glass-Steagall applied in the proper fashion means the end of Wall Street right then and there. And it's the only way the United States can survive. And if the United States does it, then Europe can survive. If the United States does not act first, and Europe fails to follow the United States' lead, Europe will go down. Totally. It's on the verge of going down now. You've got some situation in France, which is unstable, but it's there. In Germany, you have an artificial system of stability, which will collapse if the rest of Europe goes down, the southern part of Europe goes down. So we have no choice. There's only one thing to do. Glass-Steagall now. Then you have to also do you have to create a credit system which will be provided for worthwhile investments, which are productive investments. In other words, we have to put people back to work. We have, for example, we have a deadly youth problem. We have young people who are killing themselves and killing each other. And it's a part of the process, a reflection of this process. It's the price of Wall Street. Can't shut down Wall Street. We don't need it. We don't want it. It's been around too long. It was always a British institution. It was never a U.S. institution. It's a British institution. And the SOB that was most key in this was Andrew Jackson, except he wasn't the brains behind the thing. It was the British behind the thing. The British bankers moved in, established themselves under Andrew Jackson, established themselves on Wall Street, and British firms came in, based in the New York area and Boston area, and there they established their power. And since that time, with a couple of exceptions in history, the British Empire has owned the United States by owning its credit system. So the point is, we to save our nation and to save other nations too, who will go down unless we are able to help them. If we start up again and becoming a productive nation again, Europe will become more productive quickly. And that's all that's required. But we must have that Glass-Steagall, and we must have also a source of credit, a credit system. Now, we're not going to bail out money and pass it out on the streets. What we're going to do is employ people, put them to work, get them to invest in productive labor, and we're going to give them a term, a fairly estimated term of how many months, how many years they must have to gradually expend this credit and come to a conclusion whether the thing is now self-sustaining. And with, for example, the big project typical is what we can do in terms of the Great Water System, NWAPA. NWAPA is probably a 20-year to 25-year program, just on the most minimal aspects of the core program. This project will restart practically every industry that we ever lost, or the equivalent. So therefore, once we make that simple change, we don't have to have some fantastic scheme. All you have to do is go back to our Constitution and our system, go install Glass-Steagall immediately, supplement Glass-Steagall with the elements of a credit system, and then put in large projects such as NWAPA. Now, NWAPA is a big driver program. That's a real big driver program. It drives everything, all kinds of industry you ever thought of, and some you never dreamed of. And it all starts to come to work. It changes the world, because there's a real problem around the world. For example, in the United States itself, Glass-Steagall, under this kind of reform, would mean a change, an increase in the water available to people inside the United States, probably to 1.7 times the amount of water that's now available. And it would do that simply not because it's more water, but when you consume water, you don't actually burn it. What you do is you may pollute it, you have to clean it up, but you recycle the water more frequently. So you can go up to 1.7 times the amount of water that we now have. So therefore, under those conditions, we do not have a shortage of water for the Central Plains of the United States. We do not have the basis for a permanent food shortage that we have now. And because we're converting food into fuel, which is one of the major problems here, it's insane. It's insane to use food as a fuel. It's criminally insane. It's one of the greenie programs, and they're all insane. So that's the answer to this question. We have a very clear-cut way of approaching. It's not an easy approach, but it's one that works. And people that want to work must be given the opportunity to work. and we must rebuild our economy, our physical economy. We must increase our productivity. That we can do. Glass-Steagall plus a credit system like the original one under George Washington, a credit system combined with that will give us the means to start an accelerating rate of recovery of the U.S. economy and to stir a similar kind of movements in other parts of the world. For example, Italy. We know Italy pretty well. It's got a lot of problems. But we can, Spain, Portugal, Greece, which is one of the greatest victims of this whole process. So Europe can similarly recover. If the United States leads in a recovery from the United States, Europe will tend automatically to adapt itself to that opportunity. Then we have also India. We have China. We have, of course, Russia. So that the nations of this character as key nations, keystone nations, will give the world the opportunity for a general recovery, if we do it. The question is, will we do it?
I'd like to ask you a question on a specific aspect of the physical economy that needs rebuilding, specifically on food. Marcia Mary Baker, a writer for Executive Intelligence Review, put together a phenomenal fact sheet on restore national sovereignty, end the famine depopulation agenda. And I just wanted to, it's impossible not to read a bunch of quotes from this because it's really good. So let me set the stage a bit and then get to a question for you. Some of the things that she points out are that overall the production of food in the world as a whole is not actually increasing. Last year, the total output worldwide of grains was 2,200 million metric tons 2 years ago. And this year, at best, it's going to be 2,240, only a slight increase that doesn't keep up with population growth. Currently, 14% of the people in the world are hungry. And 48 million people in the U.S., 1 in 7 in the United States, which is about the same as the world population percentage, are requiring food relief, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The amount of livestock that we've got in the United States is dropping very precipitously. The number of cattle is at its lowest level in 61 years. The number of cows and heifers who calved in 2012 is at the lowest level in 72 years. So this is like, since World War II, we're at the lowest level here. And this is one of the only reasons that the price of beef hasn't been increasing as much as other food commodities, relatively, because so many cows are being taken to slaughter that it's keeping the price down somewhat in that degree. We don't produce enough milk in the United States for our own domestic needs. Not even milk. So we make up for it with dried milk and casein imports. This report goes through so much about the control of seeds by only a few corporations, the increase of food poisoning due to the more globalized food supply. So just compared in a 5-year period, there's been an increase of 14% in Campylobacter, 15% in Vibrio, 6% Salmonella increase, 8% increase in Listeria. So the food itself is becoming less safe. As far as prices go, the cost for a chicken compared to 1 year ago is up 21% in 1 year. I mean, if that's a hyperinflationary rate. In terms of what's able to be done about it, the biofuels mandate includes the proviso that in an emergency situation, if governors ask the federal government to take action, the biofuel mandate can be suspended. Many governors have brought this to Obama, and he has said absolutely not. In fact, the biofuels mandates are increasing. From 10 to 15% ethanol is the direction for gasoline. Currently, 42% of our corn crop goes to ethanol. 26% of soybeans are turned into biodiesel fuel. This is food that could be eaten, of course. So, even in spite of this, the biofuels mandates are increasing. So, it's impossible not to accept the hypothesis on this, that this is due to a specific plan of population reduction. This isn't just wildly incompetent policymaking. So my question to you is, this is one of these issues where it almost seems to have gone so far that you can hardly believe it's actually in the condition that it's in. And that's almost an incentive not to want to take it on. But what can we do to get this under control?
Well, that comes to the big one. We are, as you see from what Russian news in the past 2 weeks has been, that we are now faced with the apparent evidence that we're now faced with very serious threats of a new degree. When we had this meteor which shot through northern Russia and killed a number of thousands of people, but this came through at a velocity which is incredible for anyone to consider. It just wiped out. And if it had been a little bit larger, it would have taken out a really serious part of the population of Russia and other places. The increases of asteroids is also becoming an increasing problem. Well, what we're faced with, apart from the domestic and other problems of the planet, we're dealing with the necessity for mankind going more into space. Now, the possibility of mankind now going onto Mars as a place of habitation and so forth is not really on the table. But what we do have is we can produce systems which are control systems which we can put on Mars and other places, and we can create these instruments and instrumentalities as well, by which we can have automatic systems which are operating on Mars, for example, under control of systems planted on Mars from Earth, for example, and we can use those advanced systems to intervene with us in trying to get some degree of control of management over the asteroid plague, which is running loose at the present time. So we are in a position where we can no longer think in terms of Earth as such. Well, why not? Why not the case? I mean, we're in a solar system, which is a fairly small one as real systems in space go. But this solar system of ours does need some management. And we cannot say we're going to stick to Earth alone, and by managing Earth alone, that we're going to secure mankind's place in the solar system. We're going to have to actually do things which enable man to get greater degrees of control within the solar system. And immediately Mars is on the prospect, if NASA is restored to its full functioning, we will then be able to build up automatic systems, which for the time being will be automatic systems controlled by devices based on Earth and similar kinds of things. But in the longer term, we're going to have to get control, not on Earth, we're going to have to get control within interior parts of the solar system. That's inevitable. We have to go in that direction. And we have to go to higher energy flux densities. We can no longer stick to these low energy flux densities relative that we've been using it now. It's not sufficient. We need thermonuclear fusion applications on a large scale, even to do the things that have to be done, even for a mechanical man-directed mechanical operations in space. So this we have to change our agenda. We have to say, in order to secure life on Earth now for people, we have to go out further into other areas of space to introduce factors, environmental factors, within, say, the range of the Mars orbit. And start with that now and start to build up systems which will, in the long run, will give us the protection we need for mankind on Earth itself. The idea that we're going to stick on Earth and wait for the rocks to be thrown at us in various parts of the solar system galaxy is not a very good idea. And it's about time we took it into account. Our problem now is that our laggard attitude on developing technological progress, science-driven technological progress, that must be restored. We must go back to, really, we should go back to what the standard of, yes, President Kennedy and President Kennedy's launching of the space program and other things in a fairly short period of time that he was permitted to live, and his brother was about to become nominated for presidency also, Robert. We're going to have to go back to that. We have, in the United States, we have had, since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the United States has been going into reverse growth. There have been technologies which have been added to the repertoire, that sort of thing, but the net effect is that mankind, with the death of John F. Kennedy, the United States began to go backwards and has been going backwards ever since. And the time has come to change things. Don't look about just the little things around us now. We have to look ahead. And we have to realize that we must now we're not going to go, I'm not going to Mars. I know that. That I know. I'm too old, among other things, but I'm not going there. But a lot of other people are going to have to eventually go there. But not mostly people there. We're going to have to put systems in the solar system which can be controlled from sites plus Earth. And from these sites, we can then create a system in which we will be able to get longer range control over the immediate area of space around us. But we're going to have to do that beginning now. With the steps, we're going to have to go beyond the little thing we put up there recently on Mars. We're going to have to put up more things of this type because we need automatic systems which can be controlled from Earth by communication systems, and we're going to have to do these to discover where the asteroids are going, things like that, as well as all the practical measures.
I've got a follow-up question on that. The asteroid that struck Russia that injured 1,000 was relatively small. It's so small that there's no systematic program to even look for asteroids of that size or to detect them when they're coming in. If it was just a few times larger and it struck, let's say, New York City, the result would have been quite different. I thought this was a pretty good description. This is from a popular science writer, Dr. Kaku, who wrote in an article, Asteroid Apocalypse, imagining what it would be like to have a large one hit New York. He said, first, we would see a blinding flash of light as the asteroid smashed into the Earth. Midtown Manhattan would be instantly vaporized by the impact, leaving a crater almost a mile wide. Seconds later, the blast wave would spread out from the crater, toppling all the other skyscrapers as if they were made of twigs. Minutes to hours later, there would be a rain of fiery meteors falling from the sky, created by debris blown out from the original crater. Then, for hours and days, firestorms would incinerate an area roughly 30 miles from the impact site. Large swaths of Long Island, Connecticut, Westchester County, and New Jersey would be set on fire. At Hiroshima, about 100,000 people died in the opening phase of the blast. An asteroid impact could have casualties numbering in the millions. Now, that wouldn't even be among the largest size asteroids that would create the situation just described there. And again, at best, we're looking to find asteroids and have no real plans laid out in terms of what we would do to deflect one. This is a little bit different now. This, obviously, the wake-up call provided by the events in Chelyabinsk. I want to give some examples of what's been going on in Russia and in the United States on this. In Russia, Deputy Prime Minister Rogozin has said that we need to work, he said that that proposals for future possibilities for the country to determine the danger of objects approaching the Earth and preventing them needs to be a priority. The essence of his idea consists in joining the intellectual and technological efforts of different industrialized nations. A Russian parliamentarian, Alexei Pushkov, the head of the State Duma's Foreign Affairs Committee, he said that instead of fighting on Earth, people should be creating a joint system of asteroid defense. Instead of creating a military European space defense system, the U.S. should join us and Russia in creating an anti-asteroid defense system. Nikolai Patrushev, the secretary of the Russian Security Council, also brought up comets, which a long-period comet isn't in anybody's plans right now to find them at all. I mean, they go so far away, unless they've got a very short period, that they're becoming in at even higher speeds, very difficult to detect. So, one more quote from Rogozin, who said that the deployment of broad international cooperation on the basis of a large-scale program would help build confidence between the countries. In the U.S., we've got the chairman of the House Science Committee, Lamar Smith, who I read the quote from him last week, and then also Dana Rohrabacher, the vice chairman of the House Science Committee, who said this should serve as a wake-up call, that we had been looking for 2012 DA-14 to pass by, but then we're totally surprised with what struck in Chelyabinsk. He said, we're spending millions of dollars to find and track asteroids and comets, but the indications are that this one was so small we're not even looking for objects of this size. What concerns me even more, he wrote, is that we have no plan to protect the Earth from any comet or asteroid. So even if we find one, we wouldn't be able to deflect it. This is the only preventable natural disaster, he says. And that, that we need to move on this. There's hearings planned in the Congress that are coming up. Now, President Obama had the following to say. Nothing. No comments yet. So my question to you is about, because this raises a lot of issues, a lot of which came up in the discussion around the SDI that you had pushed forward 30 years ago, about the cooperation on new physical principles between different nations. This sort of, one of the things that came up in a meeting we had on Capitol Hill was that the Science Committee doesn't want to step on the toes of the Armed Services Committee. However, if you're trying to deflect an asteroid and you need to use a nuclear weapon to disrupt it or change its path, NASA doesn't have nuclear weapons. The Department of Defense has those. So, I mean, even inside our own country, the need to collaborate between different branches is clear. The need to collaborate on these common aims internationally is clear. I'd like to ask you, how does, if we take advantage of this warning, how could this change for the better the relation among nations?
Well, I got into this area of applied science back in the early part of the 1970s, when I was associated with the Fusion Energy Foundation. As an offshoot of that, in the late 1970s, I was in Europe, and at that point I was already working on a program for strategic defense, of space-based strategic defense. Initially it was just my program. There was a key figure of the Defense Department who was involved in it, but he was backing down from continuing because he was going to be moved out of position. But I stayed on it, and I began to gather around me a number of people who were in that business of one kind or another, so that I was building up a system which included then soon in Germany top specialists, military and scientific specialists, in Italy, among the Gaullists in France, and so forth and so on. So, and this became a basis which led to my role in SDI. In the meantime, there was another gentleman who was also working on that from up in San Francisco Bay Area, and Edward Teller. And Teller was having problems of the same type I was having. He was getting resistance from his own colleagues who would say, well, what you're doing is fine, but you shouldn't be doing it so much. We're not ready for it, that sort of thing. So, but Teller's role was very influential on Ronald Reagan, with whom he was closely associated. And so what happened, suddenly I found out that in my work on that problem, that I was working with the president. I didn't know it up to that time, but it was through this thing with Teller. And Reagan actually kept his promise to continue to build up a strategic defense system. And Teller had, at the same time, had come up with the same point we all came up with, that we could build systems which would actually be defense systems, in effect, in nearby space, defense of Earth from nearby space and going further. And, of course, this was shut down. It was shut down because you had two Soviet figures in succession who were both skunks. They were British-owned skunks, but they were at that time in charge. And then later you had, after that, you had Gorbachev, who was another part of the same thing. It was actually British agents who were in top high positions in the Soviet Union, or former Soviet Union, and they were against this sort of thing. They were against this kind of defense. And we've now come back to the point where when you look back in the history of this process, and I got into thermonuclear fusion questions and so forth in the 1970s, but through this whole process, we came to a point, and we're still at a point, where we know what could be done. Now, to say, could I predict when something would be accomplished, that I can't do. But I know what the general parameters are. I know what kind of a growth we have to have in this kind of system in order to do anything effective in this system. We have to shoot back with NASA with full fire. Just fire Obama. Get him out of there. Huh? We don't need him. But we do need a space program of the type of this type. We do need to continue concentrating on Mars. We've got to accelerate Mars. We're not going to put human feet on Mars right in the near future. That's too complicated a problem. But we can put automatic systems which can be controlled from Earth, for example, and other points out there. We can set systems into motion which will enable us to increase our capability. The first thing we have to know, we don't know where these things are located. We know in general where we should be looking for them, but we don't know. So therefore what we need immediate two things. We need detection, estimates of detection of what are the threats out there that are coming around. We also need means for action in defense of Earth and defense of adjoining areas of space. And that's what we should be doing. Now, Teller is dead, been dead for some time now. But you should see that if you take the history of Ed Teller and what the problems he ran up against with his own colleagues in his own institution, as well as in the system generally, and realize that he died without his excellent program. It was really an excellent program. He died without being able to continue that. And so when you lost Ed Teller, you had a real setback. This guy was a real fighter. He would take on an issue and wouldn't back off on the way other people would back off. But so I found out about this, of course, only when I suddenly found out that Ed Teller was the guy who was working with me, in a sense, on behalf of Ronald Reagan. So that's the way it worked. But so we do have a tradition in the United States. We do have some experience, at least in my experience alone. We do have some experience of how systems work, whether defense systems and other kinds of systems. We know how mankind can make things like that work. It's meaning pulling people together, people not with predetermined ideas, but not fixed ideas, but with open minds and skills. And when presented with a challenge, some of them will come up with something which really will work. And if people work with them, these people tend to be more quick on the initiatives. And we have in Russia. We have in Russia a whole group of people in Russia who are on this. They're limited, because Russia is limited today in its capabilities. But there are people there still for the SDE, the defense of mankind on Earth against nuclear warfare on Earth, which we call SDI, or it's in the range of the atmosphere. And the SDE, the defense of Earth from outside Earth mandate, is the same thing. We need that. And we need people like Ed Teller, if we can find him, again, to resume the same spirit that he showed for as long as he lived.
Well, for our final question of the night, I am going to bring things back to terrestrial matters. Unfortunately. Well, actually, very fortunately. I'm pleased to announce that the 7th state, South Dakota, has a Senate concurrent resolution for the reenactment of Glass-Steagall. So that's South Dakota. Maryland introduced a resolution on just this Wednesday. Rhode Island, Virginia, Kentucky, Montana, and Pennsylvania all have resolutions at the state level to reenact Glass-Steagall, demanding that Congress move to reenact Glass-Steagall. And it's interesting because a question came up during an activist call that LaRouche PAC holds weekly. A question about where the supporters in the Senate, in the Congress, are on pushing Glass-Steagall. Elizabeth Warren, for example, who ran her campaign for Senator of Massachusetts, one of her main issues, which I'd say helped her get elected, was re-implementing Glass-Steagall. Now, this activist wanted to know where is she? And it was a very good question that got, I think, a very good answer, which is call and ask her. So, I mean, additionally, in Nevada, the senator from Nevada, Dean Heller, there was a article published some time ago asking, where does he stand now? Where does Heller stand now on Glass-Steagall? He's been so quiet since after the elections. So you really have a situation with the motion at the state level, with what I can report our activists are doing around the country very effectively and will continue to do to great effect. Our activists are more effective than the Congress right now. But here's where things get where things get bad. 1 week from today, the sequester is scheduled to go through. And regardless of what kinds of politicking has gone on between the Democrats and the Republicans, whatever the game is, it will amount to a rapid destruction of the United States if it's put through, hands down. That was the intention. That was Obama's intention. And then you have, as you began this webcast, the issue of hyperinflation, which is fast coming on us, on the United States, on the rest of the world. And then you have recently statistics released from the U.S. Census Bureau, reporting that 1 in 2 Americans is either low income or in poverty. 1 in 2 Americans is poor. And so these are the conditions. We're having this incredible motion at the state level. But as it stands now, I mean, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt they weren't in town this week. But still, we have only 15 co-sponsors on Marcy Kaptur's HR 129. And the question is, what more has to be done? We obviously have to do more. What more has to be done?
Well, obviously we're already trying to do that, aren't we? Exactly that. And some of the remarks I made at the opening tonight, the same issue. The problem is that it's a deep problem, and it's an ancient one. Somewhere along the line, in really ancient times, you had systems of, well, for example, you had from the Nile, you had an exploration into the Pacific Ocean, which went to Chile, as far as Chile. And this was an Egyptian group of ships, 70 feet long and so forth, they're going out like a pack. And they traveled around this specific area and moved down into areas such as New Zealand, where one of the places they got to. They actually got people from the Polynesian population to move down into the northern part of New Zealand, where they have been for some time since then. So, and they also went down to Chile, and there's a spot in Chile which is known where people from Egypt had navigated across the Pacific Ocean down into Chile, where they left a little symbol there, a little kind of dual purpose thing there. So that mankind is naturally, when given the opportunity, naturally tends to move in this direction. But what the most of Europe, for example, European history, you have even before the Roman Empire, you have destructive systems which reduce large parts of the human population from being a creative species to a dumbed-down, slavish system of people. And the problem is typified by the Roman Empire, typified what has happened in Europe in general, up until actually the settlement of Nicholas of Cusa. Up until that time, there was a setback in the culture of Europe where servitude was the cultural legacy that dominated Europe. And you had two kinds. You had the people who were the serfs, or the slaves, and the people who were the killers and looters. So these were not good things. So you had a gentleman by the name of Nicholas of Cusa, who was one of the great scientists of all modern history, and who said we must get across the oceans, the great oceans, to other places where the servitude of Europe does not prevail, where the European habits of servitude and degeneration do not prevail. And so Nicholas of Cusa made the proposal for this to be done. He died in the process of waiting for things to get done. But he had a fellow who was very much an admirer of his called Christopher Columbus. And there were a number of other navigators who were similarly influenced. They were navigators in the transatlantic region, going into the transatlantic region. So you had a number of settlements, of explorers' settlements, in the North Atlantic and down to the middle area. But in ancient times before then, we'd had people coming from Mexico, and there are places north of Mexico City where these cultures were functioning. So we have a period of a destruction of the productivity and the courage and intellectual life of populations. And so what happened was, Cusa died of natural causes in those times, but his message went personally to Christopher Columbus into Portugal. And he organized, on the basis of that message from Nicholas of Cusa's plan, organized the crossing of the Atlantic. And it was the same process which led to the establishment of the colony of Massachusetts. Now what happened was that this development, to break out from Europe, break out from a slave-ridden Europe, across into the Atlantic, opened up a new dimension to which systems had to respond. And the state of Massachusetts, for example, was one of the key areas which triggered this liberation of Europe from its own slavish habits. Because the Massachusetts colony was more advanced than anything in Europe. And it had just been recently established within a generation of the landing, of development. So this is the way we have to look at these things. We have to realize that the time has come when we have to understand that we have to explore the planets around us, just as Columbus and company explored the conquest of the oceans, or the ancient Egyptians had effectively sailed their ships, their flotillas, down to Chile, across the Southern Pacific. So we have to take the great lessons from mankind, which are two lessons. First of all, the history of slavishness destroyed the civilization of Europe, and Europe has not recovered from that to this present day. And therefore we have to think in those terms of reference. We have to think that mankind has challenges now. Mankind is threatened on earth now because of our own stupidity and our failure to do things we should have done. But if we don't restore the spirit of Cusa and the relationship to people like Nicholas Cusa, like Columbus, without that spirit of insisting on progress, get rid of the slavish habits, get rid of the old habits, the stupid, stubborn habits, and get the kind of the pioneers who, if in attacking a problem within one part of the solar system or within the solar system itself or in some other neighborhood of the solar system, doing that and having that the state of mind and skills to do that is the essential quality which are required to get the entire human species moving in a more productive direction.
Well, I have to say that today just happens to be George Washington's birthday, February 22nd. I think he would be 281 years old today. So I think what we just did now is the best possible way we could have celebrated for George. And I'd like to thank Leandra and Jason for joining us tonight, and I'd like to thank you, Lynn. So thank you for tuning in. This was our regular Friday evening webcast, and stay tuned to LaRouche TV.